Have you ever thought about what happens when things don't go according to plan? David frowned, his gaze narrowing. That's why I plan meticulously, to avoid surprises. Susan laughed softly, shaking her head. Life doesn't care about your plans, David. Look at me. Do you think I plan to end up homeless? To be sitting here doing this? Her words struck a nerve, though David didn't show it. For all his success, he knew she was right. Life had thrown him curveballs too, failed marriages and the loneliness he refused to admit to himself. But unlike Susan, he had always responded by tightening his grip on control. Their bond began to deepen in subtle ways. David started visiting more frequently, sometimes staying longer than necessary. He brought books about parenting and child development, which Susan read voraciously, much to his surprise. She teased him about his dry choices, recommending novels and art books in return. Once, on a rare evening when they both lingered in the living room, Susan played an old guitar she had salvaged from a thrift store. The melody was simple but heartfelt, and for the first time, David felt a warmth that had eluded him for years. He didn't say anything, but Susan noticed the way he lingered by the door before leaving, as if reluctant to go. One day, during a routine checkup, the doctor mentioned the baby's strong heartbeat. David, who had always viewed the pregnancy in abstract terms, felt a flicker of emotion he couldn't quite name. Later, as they left the clinic, Susan handed him a small sketch she had made, a simple drawing of what she imagined the baby might look like. "Just thought you'd like to see," she said casually, but there was a softness in her voice that caught him off guard. David stared at the sketch for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. That night, he placed it on his desk beside the framed photographs of his corporate achievements. By the time Susan entered her third trimester, the walls they had both carefully built began to crack. David started asking about her art, her life before the streets, and what had driven her to keep going despite everything. Susan, in turn, saw glimpses of the man behind the calculated exterior, a man who, beneath his stoicism, longed for connection but was terrified of vulnerability. Their relationship remained complicated, rooted in the transaction that had brought them together. Yet moments of genuine connection, whether through shared laughter, quiet conversations, or unspoken understanding, began to redefine the terms of their partnership. Susan's resilience, her ability to find beauty in chaos, challenged David in ways he hadn't expected. And as the due date approached, he found himself wondering if this child, this arrangement, might represent more than just a continuation of his legacy. It might be a chance to rewrite his own story, discovering the meaning of trust and connection that he had spent his life avoiding. David Lewis had never imagined that someone like Susan would change him. When he first met her, she had seemed like a means to an end, another calculated choice in his meticulously planned life. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Susan's presence began to unsettle the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. It was a late evening when David found himself lingering at the townhouse longer than usual. Susan was sitting on the couch, her feet propped up on a cushion, her hands resting on her round belly. The air smelled faintly of coffee and charcoal, a mix of her nights spent sketching and her newfound love for decaf brews. "Do you ever regret this?" David asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Susan looked up, her brow furrowing. "I could, but where's the fun in that?" For the first time, David realized how much he admired her independence.